The 34th annual Powell Street Festival returned to Vancouver's newly renovated Oppenheimer Park. This year's theme is Koen, or Park, a place of gathering and appreciation of its grassroots origins.
The main mission is to have a festival where Japanese Canadians can get together, keep the culture, the heritage alive, and also to bring different groups, multicultural groups, to the festival.
Oppenheimer Park is inseparable from the festival's 1970s birth, which commemorated the 100th anniversary of the first person to arrive on Canadian shores from Japan. For many, the festival is a place to visit with old friends and acknowledge an important part of their heritage. As the years have gone on, however, the faces of the new generation have gone through an unparalleled shift.
According to Statistics Canada, the rate of intermarriage of Japanese Canadians with other races is 95%. This is higher than any other visible ethnic group in all of North America. If this trend continues, it is estimated that within the next 5 years, there will be no new generations of single Japanese ancestry left.
I went to speak with one of the few people who have studied this area. Audrey Kobayashi is the Chair of Research at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. She believes that the government's policies of interning Japanese Canadians and forcing them east of the Rockies after World War II destroyed the community and imposed a new pattern of relationships.
We do have a much higher rate of intermarriage. Then the question becomes why. And what I believe is that when you take a community and destroy its institutions, which is exactly what the government did in Canada in the 1940s, you destroy the places in which people go through the normal patterns and rituals of life, such as, for example, mating. You also destroy the self-confidence of a whole generation of people, which is what happened to Japanese Canadians as well. So, not surprisingly, it was more difficult for younger Japanese Canadians to meet one another when they got to Toronto, for example, and the government had said, well, if you're a Japanese Canadian family, you have to live so many blocks away from any other Japanese Canadians. There were no churches, no schools. It took quite a long time to get those things established.
In 1942, Aya Atagi was the principal of a school in the evacuation camps where Japanese Canadians were interned. We visited the only remaining houses left from this time in British Columbia's interior, as she told me some of her memories.
They said, you'll be going to the Rockies for 3 months and you'll be back. So you could just leave everything and just take enough for like a trip for 3 months. So of course when you're told you'll be back in 3 months, you're not going to take your deeds and your family albums and things like that, or your heirlooms. We had quite a lot of heirlooms from my grandma and grandpa. What they brought was blankets and towels and change of clothes and things like that. So actually, when it comes to mementos, I've nothing to show that I existed before 1942 because I have nothing.
The difficulty in all of this was that the Canadian government didn't know very much about the Japanese Canadians. The military had almost no intelligence capability. It had almost no one who could speak Japanese. The politicians in Ottawa from British Columbia were unanimously against the Japanese Canadians. They wanted them out, had always wanted them out, and didn't really care what excuse they used. So it was a brutal decision, but it was one that I think Canadians haven't tried very hard to understand why the government felt it had to act. At the time, in early 1942, the population thought this was not sufficient. In 1992 and 2002, the population thinks this was outrageous. It was outrageous, but there were reasons why it seemed absolutely necessary in early 1942.
The trauma of the internment precipitated a long period of silence about what it meant to be Japanese Canadian. The pressure to assimilate and restart their lives became their biggest priority.
5 years in the internment camp And then to come into a city of Toronto, I found it very challenging for all of us. I'm sure I went through it like everyone must have went through. You have to make new friends. You know, there's still discrimination. So I found that very difficult. And knowing that we're coming, and then all of a sudden you're under pressure because you got no money, and you're, you know, so we had to find jobs.
There came a time when being Japanese was a no-no, and so they tried to go out of their way to be non-Japanese.
For many, the effects of dispersal and discrimination meant marrying outside of the Japanese-Canadian community. Although attitudes have changed dramatically over the years, some still remember the challenges they faced.
The one other thing I think I remember of my Japanese-ness as a child was wishing I wasn't so.
I remember when I was in elementary school, I was like the only Japanese kid in the school. And then, you know, you go to high school and you're like one of 4 Japanese kids, right? So you are basically growing up and meeting and, you know, therefore probably attracted to, you know, the Caucasian, you know, male only because that's where you grew up, right? So that's what you saw. Whereas I'm sure now it's very different, you know, like you look around now and the high schools just have like so many different, you know, mix of races and kinds of people.
A normal thing. We didn't really feel different, but that's mostly the school was really diverse in itself. There was a lot of First Nations kids and Chinese kids and white kids.
Japanese Canadians do have a sense of their ethnocultural heritage, that it doesn't become simply erased through the generations, although it's a much transformed sense. So unlike many other communities, I don't think that there is a strong sense among Japanese Canadians that marriage and the production of children of the same background defines one's identity.
For many, the Powell Street Festival is a place that represents all of these stories, where younger generations are able to embrace their own idea of multiculturalism while still maintaining ties to their traditional heritage.
It's a place where we see old friends that we don't often see except for this time of year at the festival, and it's a place where everyone is invited, everyone participates, but it is also at the same time centered around our culture, our Japanese Canadian culture.
I think this is a really important thing for younger Japanese kids if they've just recently immigrated or if they were born here. No matter how small a part of them is from Japan.
I guess it provides an entry point for people like me to graft a sense of, you know, a sense of heritage in my otherwise very Canadian identity.